Hello and welcome to this seminar on near-death experience, offering insights into mind, consciousness, and reality. Presenters Robert and Suzanne Mays of selfconsciousmind.org. They join us today from their residence near Durham, North Carolina. Hello, I'm Andrew Linnell. I'm with the Anthroposophical Society of Greater Boston and one of your co-hosts, along with Susan Heber of the Boston branch of the International Association for Near-Death Studies. Robert and Suzanne have been involved in this for quite some time. Let me give a short introduction to them. They've studied NDE phenomena together for over 40 years, although neither has had their own personal NDE. They are also students of Rudolf Steiner's anthroposophy and members of IONS, and helped found the Emerson Waldorf School in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Their current focus is the study of NDEers, prophetic visions of future world events, which includes a survey of NDEers on visions they have had of future events, either during their NDE or at some other time. So we have a very large audience here in the Watertown Public Library, and we also have people who are online. So now let's get started. I want to welcome Robert and Suzanne Mays. Thank you.
And thank you very much for having us present at this meeting. Our talk deals with our theories about the mind, consciousness, and the true nature of reality. You can read more about our research at our website, selfconsciousmind.com. More than 40 years ago, Robert and I read Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life. Somewhat later, we were participating in an anthroposophical study group, and we're reading Rudolf Steiner's At the Gate of Spiritual Science, a summary of the basic principles of anthroposophy. We were also separately reading Return from Tomorrow by George Ritchie, the story of his very deep, profound NDE, detailing his encounter with the being of light whom he took to be Christ, who took him on an extensive tour of the spiritual world. We felt that both books were mutually confirming of the spiritual nature of the human being and the existence of a transcendent spiritual realm. Many years later, in 2005, we began studying NDEs phenomenologically. Neither of us has had an NDE. We considered NDEs to be the archetypal phenomenon of a relationship of the mind to the physical body. Very early on, we developed the hypothesis that the mind is a separate entity and separates from the physical body during an NDE. NDEs are experiences of crossing the threshold into the spiritual world, and as such, they provide a rich source of reliable empirical data about consciousness and the nature of reality. In 2008, we published our first paper on our theory titled The Phenomenology of the Self-Conscious Mind. At that time, we received incisive comments from two very prominent NDE researchers. Dr. Peter Fennick, a neuropsychologist, asked us, how does a non-material mind interact with the brain? Dr. Bruce Grayson, a psychiatrist and the most prolific NDE researcher, stated to us, you need to show how the mind and brain work together. Those comments became the basis of our research for the past 10 years. Our presentation is divided into 3 parts. We can have questions after each section. In the first part, we will present our mind entity hypothesis. A near-death experience, the NDE, is a profound psychological event that occurs generally when one is near to death or in a state of extreme psychological or physical distress. There are striking elements in the NDE. For example, there is a profound sense of peace and freedom from pain. There's a feeling of separation from the body, generally floating above one's body. One may see events in the physical realm beyond normal physical sight that are later verified as accurate. One may encounter deceased relatives or spiritual or religious beings, including a being of light. One may have a review of the events of one's life. One may enter a beautiful heavenly realm or a warm, dark, velvety void, feeling it is one's true home. One either chooses to return to earthly life or is told to return to the body. There is an NDE scale developed by Bruce Grayson. It measures the number of elements and the intensity of the elements to give a measure of the depth of the experience. There are 16 elements, each assigned a value of 0, 1, or 2, depending on the intensity of the element. The scale thus ranges from 0 to 32. An NDE is defined as 7 or greater. The average score of an NDE is about 16. The term near death is actually a misnomer. NDEs occur under many different antecedent physical conditions, including sleep, meditation, fainting, alcohol use, etc., as well as cardiac arrest and coma. Regardless of the prior conditions, the experiences have the same elements and the same intensity or depth. The experiences under the different conditions are indistinguishable. This strongly suggests that there is a common proximate cause for all NDEs, regardless of the person's physiological or psychological condition. For us, that suggests the proximate cause is the separation of the mind from the physical body.
This diagram shows the 3 states of being associated with NDEs. There's ordinary consciousness, the NDE itself, and the post-NDE state with after effects. To focus on the NDE itself, there is a sense of separation from the physical body and out-of-body experience in this state. And in this state, all cognitive faculties remain. There is self-conscious awareness, there is perception, thought, volition, memory, feelings, even when all brain functions have stopped. The NDEer has lucid thoughts, hyperreal perceptions. There are accurate veridical perceptions of physical surroundings outside of normal physical sight. Many of these verified cases have been compiled in this recent book, The Self Does Not Die. We helped edit this book and wrote the foreword to it. We highly recommend this book to anyone who wishes to understand the best NDE evidence that we don't die at physical death. NDEers have the ability to move easily through solid walls, to move at large distances instantly with accurate veridical perceptions from the distant location. The NDEer's prior knowledge and earthly memories are preserved, and new episodic memories of the NDE are formed, which are vivid and unchanging over time, and are relived when recalled. A number of recent studies showed that memories of the NDE are felt as more real than memories of real events. There are numerous after effects from an NDE, most prominently the loss of fear of death. The NDE is felt to be the most significant event of their life. Their life is changed forever. More specifically, the after effects include, on the physical level, NDEers experience interference with watches and electronics. On the physiological level, there are sensitivities to bright lights, loud sounds, crowds, some medications, and some foods. NDEers avoid watching television and movies, especially those containing violence. On the emotional and mental level, there is increased altruism and a less materialistic orientation. However, the extensive changes in NDEers' attitudes unfortunately lead to a 75% divorce rate. On the spiritual level, there is increased spirituality and but a decrease in interest in religious practice. And finally, there is strong evidence of the objective reality of the separate mind entity in so-called apparitional NDEs. There are 7 verified cases documented in The Self Does Not Die. The NDEer appears out of body to another person to communicate something, and both parties confirm the encounter and the communication. Here is case 7.3 from The Self Does Not Die.
Olga Gerhardt underwent a heart transplant. Her entire family was at the hospital except her son-in-law, who stayed at home. At 2:15 a.m., her new heart stopped beating. She was finally resuscitated 3 hours later. The son-in-law woke at exactly 2:15 a.m. Olga was standing at his bedside. She seemed normal. He thought the operation had been postponed. He asked, "How are you?" She replied, "I'll be all right. There's nothing for any of you to worry about. Give this message to my daughter." That's his wife. He wrote down the message, the time of day, and then he promptly went back to sleep. When Olga regained consciousness later that day in the hospital, she asked her daughter, "Did you get the message?" Olga had left her body and could not communicate with those in the hospital, so she went to her son-in-law instead the night before.
Can NDEs be studied scientifically? Yes. NDEs have consistent, well-defined characteristic elements and qualities, as we have described. When taken individually, NDEs appear to be subjective, but when considered collectively, they become the consistent observations of a common objective reality. The elements and details of NDEs have occurred to over 330 million people worldwide. Therefore, it's an empirical fact that over 80 million people have had a life review. It's an empirical fact that over 200 million people have heard the words to the effect, "It's not your time. You must go back. You have more to do on earth." And it's an empirical fact that over 300 million people have lost their fear of death. Therefore, we assert that researchers are justified to take NDEer accounts as objectively real, providing valid data for scientific study. So for our study, the primary sources are the NDE accounts themselves. However, standards are needed for accepting NDE data, which data to consider. Who is a reliable source? How can the accounts be validated? Tibetan Buddhist philosophy speaks of the study of extremely hidden phenomena. These are phenomena that cannot be observed directly or even inferred from direct observations. NDEs are in this class of extremely hidden phenomena. So for Tibetan philosophy, the only method is to rely on the first-person testimony of people who have experienced the phenomenon. The person must be reliable and credible. So our criteria for using NDE data as valid for scientific study include: there must be multiple NDE accounts of the same specific phenomenon. For example, the NDEer being told it's not your time. If possible, are there additional witnesses to the phenomenon? For example, in apparitional NDEs like Olga Gerhardt's. And if possible, is there corroboration of veridical perceptions by a credible third party of information received by the NDEer? Again, see the cases in The Self Does Not Die. The secondary sources for our study come from initiates and seers. For example, Rudolf Steiner, Sri Aurobindo, and Edgar Cayce. These are individuals who have demonstrated apparent clairvoyance and other higher sense faculties that resulted in expansive, all-encompassing knowledge of inner and outer realities. And many of them, we believe, had an NDE early in life. And of course, initiation itself is an NDE-like experience. So we propose that the mind entity is something separate from the physical body, having a number of implicit characteristics. First, the mind entity is the seat of consciousness of the person, the essence of the person. All mental functions and capacities are in the mind. So there are two states of the mind, as shown here: united with the brain and body, and separate. In the out-of-body state, the mind operates independently of the brain and body, and this is seen in the hyperreal perceptions, vivid and indelible memory formation, and the instant response to volition. The out-of-body mind interacts directly with physical light and sound and with physical matter. These are direct, energetic interactions that produce awareness in the NDEer. In the body, the mind is united and coextensive with the brain and body, operating as an autonomous entity within it. The mind interacts through neural activity in the brain, for example, in the sense organs, to produce awareness in the mind. In this state, the mind is dependent on brain activity. Consciousness in the body is diminished from the hyperreal level in NDEs, and thought processes are constrained. A crucial question for this theory is, how does a non-material mind interact with anything physical? And we need to make an important distinction here. The mind entity, in our view, is non-material, that is not made up of atoms, but not necessarily non-physical. And this implies it has some physical attributes that manifest according to the mind's own laws. So let's look at the phenomena regarding interactions of the NDEer's non-material body with physical processes. First, there are sensory interactions with physical light and sound waves. NDEers also report bobbing against solid surfaces, such as the ceiling, and the ability to touch and feel an object and sense the texture and temperature of surfaces of objects by touch. In addition, there are many cases of NDEs passing easily through solid objects like walls. And when passing through solid objects, some NDEs report a sense of resistance or a change of density or a swishing or wafting of the NDE's body. And finally, there are interactions with another person's body during the NDE out-of-body state. So when a cardiac arrest patient passed her hand through Raymond Moody's arm, she felt it had a very rarefied gelatin consistency with an electric current running through it. This suggests an interaction of the non-material mind to sense neural activity. Another case, 7-year-old NDE Jerry Casebolt playfully tickled another patient's nose when he was out of body, and until the latter sneezed. This suggests the ability of the non-material mind to trigger neural activity. And there are 3 cases of merging with another person to see and hear through that person's eyes and ears, or to hear the other person's thoughts. Each one of these phenomena implies a subtle interaction with physical forces. So with light and with the molecular structure of matter, such as air, solid surfaces, and solid matter, including another person's body. The most interesting of these is that NDEs easily pass through solid objects and sometimes sense a slight resistance or change of density, implying there's a subtle non-material interaction or drag with solid matter, something like passing one's hand through water. In turn, this implies a subtle, previously unrecognized physical force manifesting in material to transmaterial interactions, again, with its own laws. And this follows from Newton's 3rd law of motion. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. For every transmaterial action, there is an equal and subtle physical reaction. Moreover, since there are cases of interactions by an NDE with another person's body, that implies direct interaction with neurons is plausible. And finally, the brain's neural activations are required for ordinary consciousness. Brain imaging evidence indicates there is an intimate pairing of neural activations and subjective experience, which implies there is a direct interaction of the mind with the brain. If that is the case, at some level, neural activations must influence the mind to produce subjective experience. And at some level, the mind must influence neurons to fire. So how can the non-material mind interface with the physical brain? There are 2 aspects. First, in order to have consciousness, the brain's neural activations must work energetically to induce awareness in the mind. And secondly, the mind, in order to be aware of mental content, the mind must work energetically with neurons to induce neural electrical firing or action potentials. So very briefly, we propose that both interfaces are in the apical dendrites of the neurons at the surface of the cortex in the gray matter. So for brain-to-mind interactions, the backward propagation of neural action potentials backward in the dendrites must be sensed by the mind. And also note that on the dendrites, there are innumerable processes called dendritic spines, which contain ion channels. So in the mind to brain interface, the mind alters the molecular configuration to open these ion channels to trigger neural activations. So to summarize, NDE phenomena provide empirical evidence to suggest there is a new physical force involved in mind-matter interactions, and that direct interactions of the mind with neurons occur. And this part of our theory answers Peter Fenwick's challenge: how does the non-material mind interact with the brain?
To summarize our mind entity hypothesis, based on the evidence from NDEs, we can say that the mind appears to be an autonomous, energetic entity that separates from the body during an NDE. During ordinary consciousness, the mind entity interfaces with the brain. That's the yellow arrow overlying the brain. Concepts, meanings, semantic knowledge, and memory reside in the mind. Perceptions begin with sensory brain processes, but the conceptual semantic content comes from the mind through intuition. Thoughts, feelings, urges, volitional processes begin in the mind and activate neural processes, so they come to awareness. Memories are formed and reside in the mind, not in the brain. The mind forms episodic memories of life events through neural processes in the hippocampus, and they are recalled from the mind again through the hippocampus. Semantic memory is formed in the mind through experience and is recalled through intuition. If the idea of the mind entity is real, there should be ample evidence of its presence in the brain processes during ordinary waking consciousness. We will touch on this in the next section. At this point, are there any questions so far?
Well, there's one question that's come in, and it says some researchers claim that NDEs do not exist, as you're saying, but that they occur like dreams, only at brainwave transitions. It sounds like you have sufficient data, but how would you refute such claims?
Well, primarily through the veridical perceptions that occur, and there are 67 of them that are documented in The Self Does Not Die, as verified by third-party analysis. And basically, when an NDEer can report veridical perceptions that occur when they are demonstrably unconscious and no brainwaves at all, and they are idiosyncratic and unusual perceptions, or they are perceptions way beyond where their physical body is located, or just could not be seen by their physical body, even though in those cases, usually their eyes are taped shut and they are unconscious. They're basically in cardiac arrest. No brain waves at all, no blood flow to the brain, and therefore there can be, after 15 seconds, there can be no electrical activity at all. And those veridical perceptions are, as I say, unique and either outside the possibility of physical sensory detection, or, well, there's no explanation for how a person can see something that's miles away and accurate at the same time that they are in coma or they are in cardiac arrest. That's the primary source of evidence that, the mind must be separate. And there's so many cases that you can't propose a ad hoc hypothesis that says, well, this person was not really dead, and it was just when they woke up, there was this REM intrusion that allowed them to make up what they saw. So that's our answer to that.
Thank you. There's another question here asking you to possibly relate this to the Greek model of the human being. And I'm reading it, Soma, Psyche, and Pneuma, or body, soul, and spirit. Is this non-material mind sort of the same thing as psyche?
We would say psyche and pneuma. In other words, or in anthroposophical terms, the soul and spirit or ego. And in NDEs, there is a subtle distinction, but it is not easy to make phenomenologically the distinction between soul and spirit. And so we say mind.
Well, that's all the questions for now. Thank you.
Okay.
So we'll go on now to the second part of our presentation, which is on how the mind entity works with the brain in ordinary consciousness. To start off, we want to give you an experience of visual perception to develop an understanding of how the mind works with the brain. We have a short video with two different types of visual experiences, pairs of images and sentences to read one word at a time. Here's how it will work. Each visual stimulus is preceded by a white plus sign for 1 second. So focus your attention. Each stimulus is then flashed very quickly, about 70 milliseconds. It's important to pay attention in order not to miss the image. Due to technical limitations, some images may not show.
Show for some people.
Yeah. First, we'll present several pairs of images, and then we'll present two simple sentences, a sequence of words about 1 per second.
Okay, we'll start the video now. So pay attention. Plus. Second pair. Plus. Third pair. And now the sentences. First sentence. And the second sentence.
Starting with the two sentences, could you read the words? Did you notice anything unusual about the sentences?
Anybody?
The first one didn't make sense.
Didn't make sense. Okay.
Peanut is in love and the other peanut is salted.
Okay. And for the pair of images, did you see each image? Did you recognize what it was?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so the second image was a contrast to the first image. Maybe it was a little jarring compared to the first, like Einstein, and then who was it?
Who?
Yeah.
Lady Gaga.
You got it right, okay. All of these images were easy to recognize, even with a very short exposure time. The images or words flash for a short time and then fade out with a faint after image. At 70 millisecond exposure, the electric impulses from the retina reach the first stage of processing in the occipital cortex after the image is gone. Even without any further exposure, we become aware of the image, fully segmented and identified all at once. The brain and the mind have gone through several steps before the image comes to awareness. There is a specific pattern of neural brain activity when one is presented with an image or a concept that is incongruous or out of context or jarring when compared to the previous context. As in a picture of Einstein, followed by one of Lady Gaga, or the end of the sentence, the peanut is in love. Now we'd like to present a final visual image, allowing for an extended time to view it. This picture is a simple image, but many people have a hard time initially seeing what it is. Has anyone here seen this image before? And if so, please hold off saying anything just yet. For those who have not seen it before, can you tell what it is?
So go ahead.
Do you see the image here, or is it a meaningless display of black and white shapes? Initially, all perception starts with the unprocessed image called the given. Initially, there is no organization, no segmentation of the image, no conceptual content. To recognize the image, one needs to get the organizing concept of the image. This is the figure of a man, a bearded man, some might say, a religious figure. Do you see it?
So this is the head. This is the beard, the mouth area, the mustache, the nose, the two eyes. So that is the head. And here are the shoulders, and so on.
So there is generally a definite moment when one finally sees the image. When that happens, one sees the image all at once in its correct context, correct segmentation. One sees what it is. This is an experience of intuition. One's mind has added something new to the earlier jumble, namely the concept of the image. Do you get the image now?
So again, this is the head, and these are the eyes, the nose, the mustache, the mouth, the beard. How are we doing there? Or do some people still have a problem?
Yeah, I see it.
Okay, some see it. All right, keep going.
So this is a case of delayed recognition that shows that there are two steps in recognition. The first step is the percept, without any segmentation of the image and without meaning. The second step is intuiting the concept. With this image, one has the experience of the two distinct steps. However, in most cases, the concept is apprehended almost immediately in the mind through intuition. In case there is anyone who doesn't see the image, here is a final hint. Do you see the image now?
I hope you do.
In chapter 5 of his Philosophy of Freedom, Rudolf Steiner indicates this twofold nature of perception. It goes like this. It is due to our mental organization that the outer world is given to us at first without its corresponding concepts. Secondly, intuition adds that part of the reality, the concept, which is lacking in the percept. The thinking human being then weaves the two together to arrive at recognition and knowledge. From every real thing, the relevant elements come to us from two sides, from perceiving and from thinking. The moment a perception rises up on the horizon of my observation, thinking also becomes active through me. An entity within my system of thoughts, a particular intuition or concept, joins itself to the perception. The act of knowing or cognition is the synthesis of percept and concept.
To explore how the mind works with the brain, we'd like to examine what goes on in the brain when we read a word. Here is an example of brain activity with EEG when a person reads a single word. EEG measures the electrical voltage at different areas of the scalp. Blue-green here means minus voltage. In reading a word, there is this typical pattern of electrical activity for about half a second. In this graph, minus voltages are plotted up, and time is on the x-axis. Ordinarily, the pattern follows this lower trace, this lower black line. But when one reads an incongruent word in the sentence, there is an unusual, strong minus voltage at the top of the scalp, shown here, peaking at 400 milliseconds, called the N400. When we read words in a sentence, the earlier words establish the context. When we read the next word, as in, the Dutch trains are yellow, the word yellow fits the context with the context of Dutch trains. So the full process for a single word happens this way. At 115 milliseconds, the N1 minus voltage peak is associated with detecting the word percept, the form of the word. And the target word in the sentence shown here is Y-E-L-L-O-W, as in, the Dutch trains are yellow. At 200 milliseconds, the P2 plus voltage peak is associated with detecting the meaning of the word, the meaning of the concept of yellow, namely a bright, warm color. At 400 milliseconds, the minus voltage peak is associated with the awareness of how congruent or incongruent the word is in context. Yellow is congruent because the Dutch trains are in fact yellow, an example of world knowledge. If we say the Dutch trains are white or sour, there is a large peak at N400 because white is incongruent and sour is really anomalous. So if we say the peanut is in love, there is likewise a large N400. But consider the following story. A woman saw a dancing peanut who had a big smile on his face. The peanut was singing about a girl he had just met. Judging from the song, the peanut was totally crazy about her. The peanut was in love. And by the sound of it, this was definitely mutual. In this context, the large N400 disappears. But if we instead say the peanut was salted, that produces a large N400. So, perception and comprehension appear to proceed in three distinct stages in time. One, to detect the form of the word, the percept. Two, to recognize the meaning of the word. And three, to evaluate the word in its current context. It also happens that the three stages happen in three distinct regions of the brain. This is an MEG example measuring magnetic activity in the brain. And this is an experiment reading a single word. In the case shown here, it is a novel word that produces an N400. The neural activations shown in red and yellow occur in three different brain regions during the comprehension of the word. And these are the same three stages, but in different brain locations, which is why the voltages change from negative to positive to negative. Okay, we want to show you also how fast the processing of a single word is in the brain. These two MEG videos, brain image videos, show the neural activations involved in reading a single word, showing the different regions that activate in time. Note that stage one, which would be right here, it does not show in the video because it happens on the other side of this hemisphere, in the occipital area. the primary visual cortex is hidden in this video. The first activations happen in stage 2, peaking at 165 milliseconds, and then peak and end at 400 milliseconds for the stage 3. So we'll show the videos. So this is in real time, each word at a time. That's a word, that's a word, and so on. Each one of those is a separate word. Okay. And then in slow down 32 times, this is what's happening. And again, remember that you're not going to see stage 1, but you'll begin to see stage 2 over here. So there's the beginning of stage 2, peaks, and then peaks here and moves over and then ends here. So that is the processing in real time and slow down. So earlier we showed that NDEs demonstrate that all conceptual content and memories reside in the mind, even in ordinary consciousness. So how does the conceptual content work with the brain to come to awareness? How does the mind to brain interface work? This next diagram is a schematic view of the process. In actuality, the mind here is not separated from the brain, but is intimately connected with it. Very briefly, in ordinary consciousness, the mind interfaces and works with the brain by inducing neural firing that allows mental content in the mind to come to awareness. The mind requires neural activation to become aware of its own mental content. Therefore, the mind first impresses its mental content on a brain region, which is this red arrow. The neural activation in that region acts as a mirror to bring the mental content into consciousness, which is the orange arrow. So this part of our theory answers Bruce Grayson's challenge. You need to show how the mind and brain work together. So, are there any questions at this point?
We have a question here in the library.
Well, it's a visual question because I really could not tell which end of the brain was which from that picture. From the picture, I just couldn't tell where, for instance, the forehead was, which way the brain goes in the picture.
Could you go to the next slide, Robert?
Sure.
And the question is, can you orient us on this picture?
Okay.
Where is the forehead? Where's
Okay,
the back?
I'm sorry. So this is the forehead in all of these cases, and this is the the medial side of the right hemisphere, and this is the lateral side of the left hemisphere. So this is the forehead is right here, and this is the occipital in the back of the skull, and this is what's called the occipitotemporal area on the left back of the skull. And then this is the temporal, superior temporal and region, and that's right above your ear on the left side. And this is where the N400 is peaking, and that's why there's a positive voltage here and a negative voltage on the other side.
We have another question.
Sure.
Dyslexia. And the question is, how would this work with a person who has dyslexia?
Ah, dyslexia. Yes, well, there is a difficulty here in dyslexia in this stage right here, because this is where intuitively you see letters and you get the word, okay? You know what the word is you're looking at. And people who have dyslexia, so there's a problem in the occipital lobe and maybe the transfer of neural pulses from the back of the skull to this side part of the occipitotemporal area. And that's all that we can say but that would make sense that there is a difficulty in decoding, seeing the letters and then recognizing. It's like seeing the picture of the bearded man and you don't know what you're looking at, okay, initially. And then it finally comes, maybe then it finally comes to you, or you figure out a way of decoding it. When it finally comes to you, then you've got it, and this is then activated, and you have the percept. You know the word is, what the word is. So that's a way of explaining what is happening with dyslexia.
Okay, no more questions. You can proceed.
Okay, the final part of our presentation deals with NDE evidence for determining the nature of the transcendent or spiritual realm. This is the second hypothesis of our theory, the transcendent realm hypothesis. So our hypothesis is that reality consists of the physical realm plus a more fundamental transcendent realm. The physical realm is coextensive with and dependent on the transcendent realm. Our hypothesis is based on the fact that NDEs report hyperreal experiences in two realms, the physical realm and a supersensible transmaterial realm. In this illustration here, it comes from the book 9 Minutes, My Path to the Light by NDEer Tibor Pudnaki from Hungary. It shows the beginning of his transition from the earthly realm here to the transcendent realm. This shows the approach of a light. This is not immediately a tunnel transition. Rather, he was gently lifted up by the light through different floors of the hospital, up into the air, and then into space, traveling on this, on a light path, a tunnel of light, toward a more beautiful light. So it transitioned into a tunnel. And the term transcendent here implies surpassing usual limits. NDEers describe perceptions beyond the range of usual perceptions, that is, supersensible. They also describe that they are free from the constraints of the material world. There is no pain. There is a sense of separation from the physical body, the ability to pass through solid walls, etc. In both realms, NDEers report obtaining accurate, veridical information that would be impossible through ordinary physical means. In both realms, NDEers report encounters with deceased persons and other spiritual beings. And in the transcendent realm, NDEers report experiencing unconditional love, interconnectedness. It's one's true home. They report memories of life events and visions of the future that are later verified. They have access to limitless knowledge and wisdom and a sense of life purpose and meaning in life. And this illustration is also from Tibor's book at a much later stage in his NDE. He has already gone through an extensive life review, and he has met his soul group he calls the brothers and sisters, and has been told that he must return because he has already decided. Once he accepts his decision, he is allowed to explore the world beyond the threshold before returning to his body. And he says, "It is light. Everything consists of light." So, to understand the transcendent realm, our methodology is to compare the elements of the physical reality and examine the corresponding elements as described by NDEers of the transcendent realm. So the fundamental elements of physical reality are generally held to be space, the 3 dimensions of physical space, time, which is considered the 4th dimension, and matter, and fundamental physical forces like gravity, electromagnetic force, and nuclear forces. So, to develop our transcendent realm hypothesis regarding space, we will examine the quality of NDEer out-of-body perceptions in the physical realm. Regarding time, we will examine the phenomena of the NDE life review and the life preview. We will also touch on further aspects regarding consciousness and the meaning of life. And then regarding matter, we've already discussed this topic with mind-brain interactions. So regarding space, most NDEs report their senses were more alert in their NDE and that their perceptions were hyper-real, more real than real. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, several NDE researchers further noted the unusual qualities of perceptions of the physical realm. They used a number of different terms like transcendental awareness, mind sight, omnidirectional awareness, global perception, 360-degree spherical perception, perception by transparency, hyperdimensional perception. Now, of these investigators, Dr. Jean-Pierre Jourdain stands out for his detailed interviews of NDEers about the qualities of their perceptions and for his incisive analysis of the phenomenon of NDEer perceptions. He was the first to assert that this phenomenon implies that there is an extra dimension to reality. So, NDEers describe veridical perceptions of the physical realm while out of body, but with greatly enhanced perceptual features and abilities.
I could see at an angle of 360 degrees. I could see in front and behind. I could see underneath, from far. I could see up close and also transparently. I remember seeing a stick of lipstick in one of the nurse's pockets. I could see all at once a green plaque with white letters saying Manufacture of Arms of Saint Etienne, a city in France. The plaque was under the edge of the operating table, covered up by the sheet I was lying on. I could see with multiple axes of vision from many places at once. I wanted to go through the wall. I don't know why. I realized that it was not resisting me, and I went through it. I saw what was on the other side, a huge garden, a bicycle garage. All of these perceptions were later verified. A second example, I could see everything, and I do mean everything. 360-degree spherical vision, and not just spherical, detailed. I could see every single hair and the follicle out of which it grew on the head of the nurse standing beside the stretcher. At the time, I knew exactly how many hairs there were to look at. The specific perceptual features we have described include global perception, 360-degree spherical-like perception, perception from everywhere. Here is an example. Although my eyes were closed, I could suddenly see everything, the whole room and myself in it, and I couldn't tell where I was seeing from. I seemed to be seeing everything from everywhere. There seemed to be no observer separate from what was seen. There was simply awareness. Perception by transparency. Here's an example. When I woke up, I was above my body. I was aware of all the people who had been called into the room to help and what they were thinking. I also found myself able to see my mother on the other side of the wall in the waiting room. At that time, I could also see other people in other nearby rooms, all separated from the X-ray area by lead-lined walls. I still could tell that the walls were there, but I could see the other people in the other rooms. These perceptions were all later verified. Zoom, or instantaneous displacement. An example. What must also be understood is that it works like a zoom and a displacement all at once. When we take an interest in something, it's as if we zoomed in. It's the displacement and perception occurring simultaneously, which allows this to happen. How are we to understand what the NDE's process of perception really is?
So Jean-Pierre Jourdain proposed that the process of NDE perception could be understood by considering a thought experiment about the two-dimensional realm of flatland. In flatland, two-dimensional beings live in a flat world of just length and width, no height. The beings are completely flat, like a sheet of paper. Everything is visible to them only on its edge. Objects have no height. The beings of this world know that there are only two directions, forward and back, and left and right. They have no conception of above and below. So here's Tweety sitting in his bed. He sees the opening of the door to his bedroom, but only the edges of the armchair in the corner. Tweety slides off his bed and, moving on a line, goes through the door and the hallway and into the living room and sees his stepmother, kind of interesting shape, edge on in the kitchen. He admires the edge painting on the wall. It's just a line of colors arranged in a beautiful sequence. But Tweety can't see the painting in the vault here, or the ID card hidden behind the sofa. Tweety also can't pass through the walls of the house. Boing, boing. Now suppose Tweety suddenly has an NDE. He rises above his body, projecting him into the third dimension. Suddenly, above the two-dimensional plane here, he now hovers over the whole scene. Now Tweety perceives everything in his world all at once, just as we three-dimensional beings see all of his world from above. He gazes over the whole scene, global perception. He can see through the sofa and walls to the ID card and the painting inside the vault, perception by transparency. He can easily move through the walls of the whole house by hovering and moving in the above third dimension. So with an NDE in flatland, Tweety is propelled from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions and to the higher dimension with expanded perceptual abilities. Instead of seeing things only edge on, he can see the whole scene at once and each object from all directions at once. He can see inside objects, for example, inside his own body. He can zoom to any detail or move out to see the whole scene. Tweety's stepmother here can't see him out of body because she can't see into the above realm, the above dimension. His NDE or body is transparent in the 2-dimensional realm. So Tweedy's experiences moving to a higher dimension during his NDE correspond well to an NDEr's experience in their NDE in the physical realm. By extending the analogy of the two-dimensional case going to 3 dimensions, we can postulate that there is an extra dimension to our physical reality. For ordinary physical reality with space and time, we speak of there being 4 dimensions, including time. So the NDEr's expanded perceptual and movement abilities can be explained by the NDEr being in a higher 5th dimension. So let's consider the 5-dimensional analogs of Tweedy's 3-dimensional abilities. Tweedy, above Flatland, has global perception of all of the 2-dimensional world, whereas the NDEr has simultaneous omnidirectional awareness of all of physical surroundings. Tweedy sees inside 2-dimensional objects, and the NDEr sees through 3-dimensional objects. Tweedy floats above walls, defying the physical laws governing Flatland, and the NDEr moves through walls, defying a similar physical law. Tweedy can zoom instantly from place to place in Flatland. The NDEr can zoom instantly across physical distances by thought alone. We can now ask, what are the implications of a 5th dimension? So the postulated 5th dimension explains all the characteristic NDEr reports of enhanced perception, as we showed earlier. These perceptual enhancements probably account for the common description that NDE perceptions are hyper-real, more real than real. The postulated 5th dimension subsumes and infuses all of physical reality and includes all of the apparently unlimited, transcendent, non-material reality. Our currently understood physical laws are not immutable. The laws work differently in the 5th dimension. So here would be a good place to stop and ask for questions.
We have a question?
So it strikes me, one of the interesting things here is it's mostly visual. Now, of course, Dr. Steiner posits there are actually at least 12 senses.
Yeah.
So how these work in this 5th dimension.
Okay, I didn't get all of that.
The question has to do with the 12 senses, sorry,
Right.
and how in these experiences one can discuss these 12 senses in regards to the 5th dimensions that you're talking about.
Right, so the 5th dimension is this transcendent dimension. And if you go to what Steiner is talking about with the sense of ego, the sense of the other person, the sense of self, what else? And we can go through those. The sense of life and the sense of movement and so on. We could say a sense of balance. Some of those are transcendent. They are senses that occur in supersensibly. And others of them are finer physiological senses, like the sense of balance. So Steiner's view is much broader than the usual physicalist view and physiological view, but this is completely compatible with them. And particularly the sense of meeting another person. Well, that is, I have to say, from our reading of NDEr accounts, that is something that is right in the forefront. One senses the presence of a being. One senses that this being or this light is a being. That is the sense of the other, the sense of ego, sensing the ego of the other. And so that is definitely a supersensible sense, and it is more real, I think, more acute in the transcendent realm when one is out of body, for example.
I'm not sure if this is a question or just a comment, but it seems that there's no privacy there.
Yeah, no privacy, right. Yes, one's thoughts are there.
So there's only truth. There's no room for lies.
Yeah, there's no room for deception or lies. And so one realizes, yes, that one is there in the presence, particularly in the life review or whatever. You're arguing with the being of light because you don't want to go back. Well, yes, as you are formulating that feeling and thought, the being of light knows it. And so, yeah, one has to be totally open. And that's the way it is.
We have another question.
One might look at this from the standpoint that being is also knowing. There's no dimensions, being and knowing. And all of these descriptions you've made of transcendence, moving through walls, etc., all come into a simple statement simply of knowing. If you know, you expect things to be the way they are. And in the transcendent realms you've described, the same is the case. Not to say that the being isn't utterly supersensible and freed of the physical realm, but the fact is that being and knowing together will create the physical realm, i.e. the physical realm in the ultimate sense is illusion.
Right. Excellent point. We are going to be talking about, the implications of physical reality versus the transcendent realm. And I think that we will touch on that in this last part. So I think I understand what you're saying, that when one is out of body, one is also out of space and time. And so one is in this totally spiritual realms, totally transcendent realm. And the laws of that realm are totally different from the laws of the physical world. But there's a reason why we are incarnated in physical life. Yeah. Okay.
Point being that in the case of we're describing here, we're still connected to the physical world. Our expectation of what it ought to be, what it ought to be like.
Yes. Yeah.
We expect that. It isn't necessarily there if we were fully out of physical existence and expectations of physical existence. Rather, we could be in the realm with all spirit, in which case none of that would be expected.
Yeah. Okay, let's cover the last part, and then if that doesn't answer, bring back the question. Okay.
Before you go on, there's one quickie here.
Okay.
How for a person who has an awakening experience and remains conscious?
Oh.
The question that came in here is, how do you account for a person who has an awakening experience and remains conscious?
Experience?
And is conscious through it.
Yeah, right. Well, people have near-death experience, what we would say near-death-like experiences when they're totally conscious. There's one case, it's been described, the person looks up at the rising sun and then has this basically near-death experience of the light, or I don't know exactly I can't remember exactly what their experience was, but it was in effect a near-death experience, totally awake, totally conscious. And other people have visions, that are in effect like near-death experiences. They have the same elements or some of the same elements, and they're hyper real and they never forget them, or it can be in a dream. But the point is that these experiences, you don't have to be unconscious, you don't have to be nearly dead, or you don't have to be totally dead. You can have these experiences, and that's what we're discovering when we compare NDEs and what are near-death-like experiences or spiritually transformative experiences. They are indistinguishable, as we said at the beginning. So let's move on. So that concludes our treatment of space, and now we're going to look at the phenomena regarding the experience of time, starting with the life review. And about 1/4 of NDEs report having had a review of the events of their life. In the review, there is a simultaneous presentation of all events of one's life, generally in a 360-degree panorama or tableau, and in the presence of a guiding spiritual being.
Here are several life review accounts highlighting different aspects. During the Vietnam War, Danny and Brinkley blew up a hotel building, killing 50 innocent people. In his life review, he says, "I felt the stark horror that all of those people felt as they realized their lives were being snuffed out. I experienced the pain their families felt when they discovered that they had lost loved ones in such a tragic way. In many cases, I even felt the loss their absence would make to future generations." From Anita Morjani, "I saw my life intricately woven into everything I'd known so far. My experience was like a single thread woven through the huge and complexly colorful images of an infinite tapestry. All the other threads and colors represented my relationships, including every life I'd touched. Every single encounter was woven together to create the fabric that was the sum of my life up to this point." From Gurun Grip, "Because of the love and understanding radiating from the being of light, I found the courage to see for myself what in my actions had caused him, the being of light, pain. And for most of the episodes, the being offered me an alternative way to act. Not what I should have done, but what I could have done. An open invitation that made me feel completely free to accept or not to accept his suggestions."
Here are some of the features of the life review. Every episode of one's life is presented from the apparently most insignificant episode to the most memorable, focusing on one's interactions with others. The presentation displays the details of one's emotions and actions and the effects of those actions on others. And the NDEs, in the NDEs perspective, one is observing the event as if looking down on one's earlier self from an out-of-body position. Every event shown is hyperreal, with perception from everywhere, with zoom and displacement perception. This is the same type of enhanced perception as the NDEs out-of-body perception of the physical realm. The same unusual perceptual abilities occurring in two separate NDE elements further supports the idea that NDEs are objectively real events in both realms. So from Tom Sawyer's NDE, "I relived every exact thought and attitude, even the air temperature and things I couldn't have possibly measured when I was 8 years old. For example, in the life review, I could have counted the mosquitoes that were in the area. Everything was more accurate than could possibly be perceived in the reality of the original event." Additional features of the life review. Generally, the life review is conducted in the presence of a loving being, who is frequently described as a being of light. There is no judgment except by oneself. There is no condemnation. The loving being feels disappointment and pain from our errors and misdeeds. As with Dannion Brinkley, the NDE may be shown the ripple effect of one's actions to others in widening circles and through generations. As with Anita Morjani, the NDE may see their actions in relation to a vast, intricate tapestry of relationships, every life that one has touched, showing one's interconnectedness with everything. And that would include people that you meet in the street and never see again. One is shown how one could have acted without condemnation or coercion, implying one has free will. And the purpose of life is love, an activity that can be expressed only in relationship to other living beings. And another phenomenon regarding the experience of time in an NDE is the life preview, a prevision of future events. The previsions may be of one's personal future.
Ken Ring described a boy's life preview that included 2 predictions at age 10 in 1941. One, you will be married at age 28. This did indeed happen, even though at my 28th birthday, I had yet to meet the person I was to marry. 2, you will have 2 children and live in the house that you see. This memory suddenly became present one day in 1968 at age 37, when I was sitting in the chair reading a book and happened to glance over at the children. I realized that this was the memory from 1941. Pim van Lommel described a man's life preview, quote, "And in a flash, I saw the rest of my life. I could see a large part of my future life, taking care of my children, my wife's illness, everything that would happen to me. I wrote down all the things I saw back then. Over the years, I've been able to check them all off. The checklist included a vision of his wife on her deathbed in a white shawl, just like the one she was given by a friend shortly before she died."
Alternatively, the previsions may be of future world events, future technological advances, such as the development of nuclear power, and also natural disasters and political upheavals. We are now studying these prophetic visions and will present our preliminary findings at the 2019 IANS conference in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania at the end of August. And further features or characteristics of the life preview include the memory of a future event is frequently suppressed after the NDE. It may come back in a dream just prior to the event's occurrence, or is remembered only when the event occurs. And predictions that fail to materialize may be due to the free will choices of individuals that change the trajectory of events. So what are the implications of time-related NDE phenomena? First, the life review implies that there is an exact detailed recording of all events in the physical realm, at least those involving human beings. All the actions, emotions, and thoughts of a person and their effects on other people seem to be inscribed in a permanent book of world memory that can be accessed by the change in consciousness during an NDE. The record appears to be built into the fabric of reality in the transcendent realm. And esoteric traditions state that all details of earthly life are encoded in what is variously called the Akashic Record, or the Book of Life. Rudolf Steiner states, as soon as one enters the spiritual world, time changes into space. In the Akashic Chronicle, events are detailed exact snapshots placed side by side in a higher dimensional space. The record appears as an intricate network or tapestry of interrelationships for events as they unfold through time in the physical realm, with ever-widening ripples reaching out to essentially every other person. And the life review implies that one has free will in one's actions. One is shown how one could have acted, and how one should have shown how one acted, and how one could have acted. And the life preview implies that future events are laid out and even rehearsed well in advance of actual earthly events. Thus, each person's life has an overall life plan, but out of free will, one can choose differently from what was originally planned, and the plan is adjusted based on one's choices. And there are accounts of NDEers that relate that they decided differently from what was planned, and things were adjusted.
Now we will also need to consider the nature of consciousness in the transcendent realm. First, the essential components of the transcendent realm seem to consist entirely of conscious, individuated beings. There is the NDE herself and deceased loved ones. There are spiritual beings, guides, angels, the being of light. And there is telepathic communication between these beings. The communication is described as instantaneous, mind-to-mind thoughts without speech, without one's mouth moving. And there are numerous cases of veridical information communicated in the transcendent realm and later verified. Furthermore, perceptions of transcendent objects appear to be dependent on the observer's inner state of mind. The perspective of the life review implies there is a higher aspect of oneself than is experienced in ordinary consciousness. From Natalie Studman, she says, we are more than our physical bodies and our limited minds. We are already that whole self, perfect, complete, and ever-changing, though we may only be consciously aware of a small portion of ourselves. In esoteric traditions, this aspect is called the higher self, one's eternal spiritual self. What therefore are the implications of the meaning of life on earth? Shakespeare has the image that earthly life is a play, that as actors we all have our parts. Earthly life is not easy. NDEers are told that Earth is the most difficult place to be incarnated. Rudolf Steiner's view is that the physical world is a school. One must develop and go through difficult experiences to become mature, but we have chosen to undertake them. One NDEer said, I was told by the light there was a reason for everything that happened, no matter how awful it appeared in the physical realm. And within myself, as I was given the answer, my awakening mind now responded in the same manner. Of course, I would think, I already know that. How could I ever have forgotten? Indeed, it appears that all that happens is for a purpose, and that purpose is already known to our eternal self. So the meaning of life can be summarized as follows. We are eternal spiritual beings having an earthly incarnation. We do not die with the death of the physical body. There are two life lessons for our earthly existence: to learn love through interactions with others on the earth, to learn wisdom through life experience. An NDEer said, God told me there were only two things that we could bring back with us when we died: love and knowledge. So I was to learn as much about both as possible. Let's now summarize the overall picture of the transcendent realm. First, the transcendent spiritual realm is a higher dimension than the physical realm's 3 dimensions plus time. The NDEer's perceptions of the physical realm are of a higher order. Second, what is the relationship of the transcendent realm to the physical universe? The transcendent realm includes, contains, and infuses all space, time, and matter of the physical universe, and apparently exists beyond all physical space. NDEs frequently experience a transition beyond the physical realm to the transcendent realm. Prayers on earth are perceived by the NDE in the transcendent realm as luminous bubbles or sparkles of light rising to them from below. Spiritual beings from the transcendent realm appear in the physical realm in spirit visitations, deathbed visions, and after-death communications. The laws of the transcendent realm supersede physical laws. NDEs have accurate veridical perceptions at a distance from the physical body. Life reviews present details of life episodes far beyond the NDE's actual earthly experience. Life previews present precognitive visions that are later frequently verified as accurate. There is a new physical force of interaction between the material objects and transmaterial entities.
Most NDEs are told some variation of the following. It's not your time. You must return. You have more to do with your life on earth. This statement is so common in NDEs that its implications cannot be easily dismissed. It implies there is a plan and purpose for one's life, things specifically to be learned, experienced, and done. It implies that one's purpose was set before birth and agreed to. And it implies that there are benevolent, guiding, transcendent beings present throughout one's life. So, the transcendent realm can be viewed as the ground of all existence. The existence of the Akashic record implies the centrality of earthly human experience. Carl Sagan once derided our delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe, where our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark, a mote of dust suspended on a sunbeam. On the contrary, NDEs are told that we are co-creators with God. You humans are truly the heroes, a being of light told Daniel Brinkley, because you are doing something that no other spiritual beings have the courage to do. You have gone to earth to co-create with God. So the overall implication is that there is a higher purpose of earthly life. First, we have the opportunity for our own individual development as free spiritual beings. Second, we can assist the evolution of humanity by developing our capacity for love, which will become a new force in nature. And ultimately, humanity will achieve the transformation of the earth as co-creators with God. So, thank you.
Thank you. We can take one or two more questions if there's any, or comments that somebody has. We have an audience here. I don't think you can see them, of about 17 people, I think I counted. So any other questions, or yes?
Yes, hi. I think I have two brief questions, but first, thank you very much. Oh, now can you hear me better? Thank you. So thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. Do you have any data on what NDEs see as their image of themselves?
What do NDEs see as their image of themselves?
Do they have a body image? Do they bear some relationship to their current living image of themselves at the very beginning of their experience?
So if the NDE were to describe how did I look to myself during the NDE experience, how is that the same or different than the physical impressions that we have?
Well, it's different. Obviously, they see themselves as non-material beings of light. Yeah, mostly they give descriptions of what they see of other people, but many of them have the sense of that they have a body, just like they have in ordinary physical life. They see others as much younger, and like in these apparitional NDEs, they appear just like normal. They appear normal. They appear clothed and, you know, probably in the usual clothes, and they appear solid. Okay, that's when they are viewed by another physical being, human being that knows them, and they appear to them. That also is the way they appear in after-death communications as well, deceased people. So they appear as normal. Now, how they view themselves, sometimes they will say, oh, well, I looked down at my arm and it was transparent, or I could see tubes running up and down my arm. It had a structure. But they usually feel themselves dressed in their normal clothes, but they don't see themselves as solid. In this transcendent realm, they feel themselves to be beings of light, having light, emanating light.
Well, I want to thank you all, not just you, Robert and Suzanne, but all of you here in the audience. Great questions, great attention. It's a very hot day, as you know, 100 degrees here in Boston. But we have had, I think, coverage of a subject of immense importance, because our culture, our sciences are looking for a new model. Times are changing, and I hope all of you have been inspired that we can bring this new model, the proof of which is coming from these near-death experiences. I applaud what IANS is doing and what researchers like Robert and Suzanne are doing. So thank you again for attending, and thank you all.